Okay, this is Deborah Kitko, Genealogy Librarian with the Wayne County Public Library here in Worcester, Ohio, coming back to you with the second part of the discussion on the U.S. Census records. Now, in the first part, we talked a little bit about the basic overview about the U.S. Census, how it's taken every 10 years, starting in 1790. And the most recent one available for public viewing would be the 1940 census. Now, the statistical information as part of those U.S. Census records are available. It's just the family, the more specific individual information would not be at this point unless you specifically request it through the National Archives. And so our first discussion, we talked, just as a recap, from 1790 to 1840. Usually the head of the household is given and everyone else are categorized with the number of people according to their gender and according to the age bracket, and that varies a little bit from census year to census year. We also talked a little bit about, the census was not taken overnight, that it was actually a process that would take anywhere from, 2 years, and even less, sometimes, maybe about 1 year's worth or about 9 months worth. It just depends on the time period and what was the means of transportation at that point. And we also mentioned about the 1890 census being destroyed pretty much. It was part of unfortunately, it was a lot of water damage was done to that, and then the government deemed it was not historically viable, so they actually got rid of that back in 1937. So right now we're going to continue on with the 1900 census. In my opinion, the 1900 census is by far the best census that's available. It provides a lot of good information. With all the other census records, you only have the age of the individual, of each individual given, at least from 1850 forward. The 1900 census, they did something different. They decided that they were going to actually include the month and the year of birth of each individual in addition to their age. So that really helps out tremendously. It also is the first census that provides information in terms of how many children were born to the mother or to each of the females, and how many of those children would still be living. So if you find someone that may have had 9 kids, but only 4 are still living, that means 5 kids have been born and passed away that you have to try to trace and try to find their information on. It also provides information in terms of how many years the individual was married. So if you see that they were married, for 20 years, then you know that they were married in 1880. So it's giving you a time frame in terms of trying to find some additional information. It continues to include both an individual's birthplace as well as an individual's parents' birthplace. But the 1900 also includes the year of immigration and whether the individual is naturalized. So this will help you in terms of trying to find a ship list, possibly a ship manifest, or if they're a naturalized citizen, usually it's represented by an NA. You may also find an A for alien or a PA for pending application. Remember, the naturalization process was pretty much a 2-step system where you have to file all your first papers and then you file your final papers. And that's for a whole nother discussion on immigration. But this will give you a clue that if you do have a naturalized citizen, then you have to go to the court records to try to find that naturalization record as well as the declaration of intention to become naturalized. So once again, you can use the U.S. Census record for some of the other columns to actually give you clues to look in other resources as well. If they were actually also mentioned whether the individual owned the house or the farm or if they rented the house or the farm. And that's going to give you clues. If they're owning the home or owning the farm, then you're going to want to look at land deeds. If they're actually renting, then you may want to look to see if there's any type of lease agreements or any type of rental agreements that may have survived through the course of time. So just look beyond just the names and the dates and the places of birth. Look at some of the other columns also to find out what other clues you may find within that census. The 1910 census was actually taken April 15th, 1910, and this was completed within 30 days or 2 weeks for communities with populations of about 5,000 plus. And the 1910 as well as the 1920 census are pretty similar to like the 1900, except they have reverted back to only giving the age of the individual living within that household. But there's other clues. For example, in the 1910 census, I'm looking at my cheat sheet here, it indicates whether they're a survivor of a Union or of the Confederate Army or Navy, whether they're blind, deaf, or dumb, and it also gives a name of street as well as the house number. In 1920, It's also giving some information as well about the address and gives you a farm schedule. However, these farm schedules after 1900 don't really exist anymore. Some of the stats may exist, but the details do not. And then, of course, you have the 1930 census, which gives a lot of the same information as the 1910 as well as the 1920 census. And we're actually going to put up a few examples of some of these census records and a cheat sheet in terms of a summary of what would be available on each of these census records. That way you can take a look at the paper at your own leisure and sort of read through it and then sort of explore on your own with Ancestry, Heritage Quest, Family Search, what other resource you're using to try to find some of these census records. And of course, I mentioned, in the first session, I mentioned that in most cases, the U.S. Census was taken during the spring, usually May to June time period, sometimes extending further. The 1920 census is an exception to the rule because this census was taken January 1st, 1920, and was supposed to be completed within 30 days. Now, interesting enough about this, this can be useful. An example from my own personal family, my grandmother's twins, there's a tombstone that indicates that you had Lucille and you had Homer, and they were both born and died December 1919. And I have found a birth record for them. I have not found a death record for them. However, I did find that although my grandmother had had this tombstone erected as December 1919, which is what she had remembered, they were actually born and passed away before she was born. But on the 1920 census, I find Homer, the twin, still living. So I know that based on the 1920 census that he lived for at least 1 month. So I have not been able to find a death record to confirm when he actually did die. But that's one of the clues that you want to look for. Pay attention to these census records and pay attention to the date that the census was actually, that the enumerer actually took the census. And that's included at the top part of the paper, at the top part of the image that you may find online. So that is very important to note. You'll also note that sometimes you'll find something listed as like 9/12 or 6/12. And this means that the individual is like 6 months or could be 9 months. And based on the enumeration date, you can actually estimate in terms of when that individual would have been born based on how many months that they were living. So, like I said, the 1940 census is the most recent one that's available. It doesn't give a whole lot of immigration information on there. But it is the first census and the only census to date that provides an indication in terms of who actually provided the information. We talked a little bit about that during the first session. So that's definitely important information to know about the 1940 census. So, and the 1940 census was actually taken April 1st, 1940. So, and this one, it gives some other information as well. The 1940 also indicates, well, it asks the individual where the residence was in 1935. So you're actually having a 5-year time period there that now you know where they may have come from or where they went to. And there's a lot of other information. This is a time period we're talking about the WPA projects, and so there's some questions relating to that. It's asking, for example, if the person that worked for the CCC or the Civilian Corporation Corps or the WPA, the Works Progress or Projects Administration, or the NYA, the National Youth Administration. If you find that you have an ancestor or one of your collateral lines that work with this, you may want to seek out some additional information to see if any records do exist from those special programs. So there's a lot of good information included on those census records, but I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to actually look beyond just the names and the ages and the places of individuals, because you can find a lot of other nice little treasure troves, nice little clues, and nice little nuggets to continue research in other places based on information you find in the U.S. Census record. So once again, I'm hoping that the series is beneficial to you. Go ahead and subscribe if you have not done that yet. We also welcome your feedback. Are these, helpful little sessions? Do I need to go in more detail? Are they too long, too short? Any type of feedback would actually help me provide this additional service for you out there. So until next time, log on and begin doing some searching. Take advantage of those U.S. Census records, the vital records, and some of the other records we have talked about. And I'll see you next time. You tune in.